For the participants that are already here, maybe you could go into our Menti. We'll be doing some polls later, so you can enter in the code and the website for Menti first. Wow, we have some questions coming in already. All right, 1 more minute to go. All right, then we shall start. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Economic Society of Singapore's second webinar series. Is Singapore economy in trouble now, and what can we do about it? We welcome not just Singaporeans, PR, we also welcome many people from different countries to join our webinar. Before we begin, just some things for you to take note. There will be interactive polls along this webinar, so please do participate. Please log in to www.menti.com and key in the code 9746964. Kindly post your questions on the Q&A section. Please feel free to upvote or comment on the questions that you feel are relevant. If your question is specific to any panelist, please do mention it in your question as well. Prize winners of the World Scientific ESS webinar giveaway will be announced at the end of the webinar. Now, the numbers are in for Singapore's GDP in the second quarter of 2020. A 41.2% drop in the quarter-on-quarter GDP and a 12.6% drop on a year-to-year GDP. What do these estimates mean for the economy? How strong will the economic recovery be? And is the Singapore economy resilient enough to bear future waves of the COVID-19 and its knock-on effects? Do the numbers actually reflect some functional or structural imbalance in Singapore? And what are the implications for Singapore when the region or our trading partners are facing similar economic problems? In the second ESS webinar, join our expert panelists that we are very honored to have today from academia, industry, and the public sector as they explore these issues with you. We are very proud and honored to have our three distinguished panelists today. Professor Danny Quah from Lee Ka-shing Professor in Economics and Dean of Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, NUS. We have Professor Laura Wu, Associate Professor in Economics from the School of Social Science in NTU. And of course, we have Dr. Paul Schotti, founder of Schotti Research. Chairing today's session will be Professor David Lee, Professor of Singapore University of Social Sciences, Vice President of ESS. Without further ado, may I now kindly invite our President, Professor Houston Quah, to give opening remarks to this webinar series. Houston Quah, please.
Thank you, Denon. Welcome everyone to our second ESS webinar. ESS mission is to raise awareness of economic issues and discussions on contemporary topics in economics. Economics is a very exciting discipline of study and inquiry as it touches on every fabric of society's concerns and daily life. We host many events, forums, and talks pertinent to Singapore, and our eminent speakers come from the public sector, private sector, as well as from the academia. We aim to provide rigorous analysis and insights into many issues of the day, and we hope you will find the Economic Society of Singapore an exciting entity of ideas and quality discussions. I'm happy to see our members as always, and on behalf of my fellow council members and of our society, I look forward to those who have yet to join us become ESS individual members or as corporate members. In fact, most of our functions, we reserve priority for members of the ESS. For more information, you can visit our recently revamped website at ess.org.sg. Now, I would also like to take the opportunity to tell you about our third ESS webinar following this, which will be held on the 23rd of September. So please take note, 23rd of September is our third ESS webinar, and the title of this webinar is, Will the US dollar continue to be the dominant reserve currency? The webinar will feature our ESS council members like Prakash Kannan, Chief Economist of GIC, who is chairing the webinar. David Lee, the present webinar chair, will be a speaker. James Lim, ESSEC, an associate professor and member of parliament, and Song Seng Wen, director of private banking at CIMB. More details on the webinar will be released very soon through our website and by email. Thank you, and please enjoy the webinar today.
Thank you, Prof. Hua. Next up, can we have some opening remarks from the chair of our session, Professor David Lee?
Thank you very much for introducing me. I'm just about to share a slide that hopefully you can see. Okay, all right. Okay, first of all, it's really a pleasure to be able to chair a panel consisting of very esteemed colleagues and fellow researchers, and I'm very happy to be here today. For the next few minutes, my job to kick off the discussion is just to look at what the Singapore government has done. I think we are all very familiar, but I know that many of you are not from Singapore. So just to give you a 3-minute summary of what we have done in Singapore is that we have 4 budgets and the minister's statement just a week ago, and we work in many areas, but these are some of the important initiative that the Singapore government has done, which is the staff retention business model, expanding the ICT sector, as well as training and education. And we also could see that there are many other side initiatives that the Singapore government has done. From, I think a lot of people who are not from Singapore and from Singapore will be familiar with Project Ubin, and also the grants, the business growth, digital acceleration grant, as well as training, especially the digital resilience bonus, ICT sector accelerator, and also Tesla mid-career. These are all the accelerator that we have seen. And there are also a lot of cross-border collaboration because the focus is on building digital infrastructure. I mean, we talk a lot about hard infrastructure and infrastructure financing, but if you look at the international organization, the focus is in trying to keep the supply chain open and try to digitize the entire supply chain as much as possible, and so also to strengthen the digital connectivity, and that has to do with trade financing, because trade is 4 times of Singapore GDP for those people who are not familiar with Singapore economy, as well as food safety. We're going to be 30% of self-sufficient. Those are new business model, new business opportunities that we have. Data connectivity and storage, and we know that cloud centers with all the big tech giants are now setting up you know, a lot of cloud centers in Singapore. Those are the new businesses, those are the new use of the real estate sector. And then we have a lot of utilization of digital trade of documents of like GATS, you know, We have a lot of partnership to ensure food traceability and then leverage on cloud. And so these are all the new things that we have been doing in Singapore. And that is just to kick off this discussion. And I would now actually like to invite Professor Danny Quah to deliver his speech. Professor Danny Quah.
Thank you.
Professor Lee and Professor Danny, perhaps we could get to know them a bit better first about through some polling at Menti.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Professor Quah.
That's all right. Thank you, David, and thank you, MC. I hope that I'm coming across now, but I will wait until this particular slide goes through.
Yes.
So, okay. I think Danon, we have a few questions, which is now we are just polling, and people can go on to the menti.com and use the code 521397, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So please do log into menti.com using the code 5213897 to let us know more about you, about what you're doing, or what is a profession.
Okay. While we are looking at this, actually today discussion will be quite interesting in a few things that I think I was just thinking about the landscape of Singapore is whether the market really understands what Singapore government is doing with its public policy of building digital infrastructure. I think we spent a lot of energy over the last few years to build the digital infrastructure in Singapore and in the region with all the new regulations that came on, like Payment Services Act, digital banking, and also the Omnibus Act that seeking consultation, as well as IMDA, ESG, and also a lot of grants and hands out. So actually, we can discuss a little bit more later about whether the market really understand what Singapore government is doing. Perhaps what we could do at this moment while people are voting is to let Professor Danny Quah start with his, oh, okay, we are back again.
Yeah,
so,
sorry.
Okay.
So 55 have voted.
Right. I think we have about 237 people online at this moment. I think many of you are still not responding to that, but you can see that we have quite a lot of people in financial services as well as students, right? So we will see more, and there are others there. So this is something that we are warming up. So there will be more questions coming. So please go on to menti.com. We're going to stop this for the time being. At least we know that quite a lot of you from financial services. Do you have another question, Danon?
Yes.
Okay. I think a lot of you should actually put on to menti.com and answer this question, because that will give the panel members a little bit more feel of whether you feel that the Singapore economy is in trouble now, and what are some of the words that comes to mind for you when we talk about Singapore economy in trouble now. So please take a look, okay, at what you have. Okay, while we are doing that, putting up that, I have a second thing that perhaps I could set the stage a little bit, and that follow up to my first comment and the question to you is that if the people believe in the government, what the government is doing, building all this digital infrastructure and looking at trades, which is 4 times our GDP, whether we have the knowledge, the skill set, and the mindset. Most important is the mindset in the private sector, in education, in outside the government, to take the plunge into becoming the whole new class of virtual services providers, which we are now promoting, that serve the whole world without geographical constraint, because we only have 5 million people, and we used to have having to send people into Indonesia, into Thailand, to own the factories, or buy the land, and then physically there, but we don't have enough people. But with the virtual world, it's borderless, and then it is just a few people that we can do social scalability and technical scalability. My question is that, do we have a population that really have the mindset to do that? So that's a question that I'm also posing to you in the audience, as well as a panel member, and I think they will be answering that question as well. But as you are putting your the words that come to you in this Singapore economy, I can see the word recession going up there, unemployment, uncertainty. There seem to be a lot of anxiety, but we could see, you know, a lot of protectionism, populism, opportunities as well. I see opportunities, I see change, you know, and I see some people just having the answer yes, but it disappeared. Seems that there are more anxieties than actually, you know, solution that we're looking at. But I can see three words. I will summarize by saying recession, unemployment, uncertainty. These are the three keywords that is in your mind. So with that, I think we can save that, you know, survey. And I really like to again invite Professor Danny Quah. Has been waiting there for quite some time, and it's very, very important message that we all should listen. So Professor Danny Quah, please enlighten us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I hope this is coming through. That was very enlightening to see those words coming up, to see that word cloud forming. And thank you for the very nice introduction. I want to pick up actually on some of the key words coming out in that word cloud: unemployment, recession, loss of jobs, uncertainty. And those are in fact the key concerns that that perturb us, that worry us across the spectrum. You know, when we began this seminar, we saw the range of people who were attending the seminar, but across all this range, it is these keywords, and it's exactly that I want to pick up. So there are 3 points I want to make in the time that I've got here. The second of those points, I'm going to begin with the second rather than the first. The second of those points is that job loss, recession, unemployment, uncertainty, economic pain, that is going to be inevitable. The right question is not whether we can prevent that, but how we come out of that. So my second point is that pain is inevitable. My third point will be a set of proposals on how we do come out of this. But my first point is a way to help us understand why, on the one hand, I am pessimistic, but also optimistic. Why I think that pain is inevitable, but here are the things we must do that will come out of that. And my first point actually comes out of a movie. Not just any movie, it comes out of a martial arts movie. It comes out of a Bruce Lee martial arts movie. And my first point is boards don't strike back. Now remember the scene from Enter the Dragon, where Bruce Lee, our hero, is lined up against his counterpart, his opponent in this martial arts match. And in the opponent, what the opponent does is to try and intimidate Bruce Lee by punching a board and breaking it in the air, what in martial arts is called an air break. Bruce Lee is not bothered. He said, look, in a second you're going to be fighting me. And the board that you just hit, boards don't strike back. Boards don't hit back. Now, the reason I say boards don't hit back is that when you're talking about an economy, most of the time, the shocks that hit an economy don't hit back. Most of the time, the shocks that hit an economy, a loss of confidence, a productivity shock, a financial concern in this part of the economy that spills over. And then when you ask the question, is the economy in trouble? Yes, you can put your finger on the shock. Second, what do we do about it? We counter-react to that shock. We address that shock. We hit that shock. And in the traditional economic thinking, the board doesn't hit back. Now, here's the problem. In the current situation, our economic enemy does hit back, because we might have forgotten in all the discussion about this budget, that job support scheme, this is what we're going to do. The cause of all this It's not because people lost confidence and then were shutting down shops. The cause of all this was something called COVID-19. And COVID-19 is something that's alive. It is a virus. It has goals. And when you hit against COVID-19, it will hit back. The way in which we need to think about how our economy needs to respond to this COVID-19 shock is different from how we traditionally think about responding to economic shocks. COVID-19 is a virus. It is a living thing. It seeks to survive and to spread. And when it looks at you and me, it sees food and it sees a way to get around. When it looks at you and me, it sees chicken McNuggets and an Uber driver. And what it will want to do is to get all of its chicken McNuggets together and have us drive it around so that it can spread. And when we design economic policies to counter-react against this shock, to counter-react against the closures of business, the inability to engage in congested business activity, the shutdown of huge swaths of tourism and travel industry, it is not because we're just doing it for reasons of a passive economic shock, a board that will not hit back. It is because we're trying to keep COVID-19 under control. And the economic policies that we need to think about that will reset the economy are the economic policies that respect and deal with COVID-19. So it's not just increasing aggregate demand spending. It's not just improving productivity. It's trying to take care of a workforce that must no longer be in a congested situation where that is what raises productivity. We must not be thinking anymore about moving people around in crowded mass transit systems because that is what normal modes of business activity operate. The right economic policy that will rescue the Singapore economy, as will rescue all other economies, will be the economic policies that recognize this is not a board that's not going to strike back. And the pain is inevitable. So this is my second point. We're dealing with an enemy, an economic shock that is alive. So a downturn is inevitable. Loss of jobs is inevitable. Economic pain is inevitable. When you look around the world, the United States, the world's strongest, most profoundly influential economy, it, in the face of COVID-19, went from a low of unemployment over the last 50 years to a high in unemployment in the last 90 years in the space of 60 days. When you look around the world, the global economy in January was expected to expand by 3%. By June, the expectation is it will contract by 5%. This is a turnaround of 8 percentage points, and we see that reflected around the world. The only major economy around the world that's going to show positive growth at all in 2020 is China. China will grow in expectation by 1%, but even that is a reduction of 5% from what it traditionally was. That is the world that we're living in. As David has said, in the typical year, Singapore trades $3 for every dollar that we produce in Singapore. We trade 300 to 400% of GDP. And when the global economy has turned around 8 percentage points, we have to manage our expectations properly. We rely so much on the rest of the world to be an engine of growth for us through trade. We need the rest of the world to pick up again. So that is the pain that we're going to have to go through. The numbers are already in. Danon read them out, and Laura again will go over those numbers as David has already done. Let me turn, in the time that I've got left, to the last part of my intervention, which is what we do to get out of this. And I've already said, this is not the Keynesian kind or even a supply side kind of shock, where you push back against it and then you overcome it by pushing hard enough. If you push hard enough, we run the risk of reigniting a COVID-19 third or fourth wave. And while we might have forgotten the fears that surrounded us, The fears that surrounded us at the beginning of COVID-19 are still the fears that remain today. Healthcare systems around the world being overwhelmed, hospital beds being run out, no respiratory ventilators, people lying in hospital corridors, being unable to find treatment, people dying in the streets, a breakdown of law and order. It is not your typical economic shock. So our response has to respect that. So here, in the time that I've got, 2.5 minutes that I've got, are my proposals. My proposals actually rest very well with what Singapore's policy already is. The proposals need to take two forms. The first is maintaining aggregate demand and aggregate supply, traditional Keynesian type mechanisms. And through, in that sense, the 4 budgets that has already been referred to by David and that Laura will unpack for us more, they provide the economic oomph to keep aggregate demand going and to keep aggregate supply afloat, to keep the economy going. But again, manage our expectations. This is not going to restore the economy anywhere in the world. It will simply prepare all of our people, all of our workforce to be ready for the upturn when it comes about, and it will come about. But at the same time that we do this, we have to respect that creative destruction has to occur. The way in which we do business has to change. All modalities of doing business that rely on throwing people together in congested, crowded places, in crowded central business district, in moving mass amounts of people back and forth in mass transit systems, that we realize is not just something that we don't need, it's something that we can actually do without. That people can engage in valuable economic activity. We need to encourage these kinds of sectoral reallocation, and indeed the government is doing that. We need to have a policy of protecting the worker, not the job. We need to constantly retrain the workers, as the schemes on job support scheme they've already seen, as the retraining that at my university, the National University of Singapore, we're constantly looking to do in our resilience and growth schemes. We need to reorient how we think of as appropriate economic policy, because we need to prepare our people for the upturn when it comes, and the upturn will be different from how it was before 2020. Now, I've just about run out of time, so I thank you for all your attention, and I look forward to the Q&A session. Thank you all very much.
Well, Professor Quat, that's really brilliant analogy, and I really like, you know, the Bruce Lee analogy. I think Dana is going to ask the question now, but I'm going to just summarize what you said, and maybe you can see whether what I'm saying is correct. I think you mentioned about Bruce Lee. I think everybody loved the analogy, and I will add on to say that you actually talk about not only being punched by Bruce Lee, but Jet Li and also Jackie Chan, all three together, because we have the structural imbalance that really existed in the digital transformation. And then you talk about COVID, which is like we have Jet Li also punching at us, and then we need to worry about the monetary and fiscal policy, which is going on for so long to solve the problem, and that Jackie Chan is also punching us all at the same time. And you mentioned about pain is something that we need to accept. It's an acceptance that we have entered the period of pain that I think all regulators and policymakers and the citizens have to understand. And I think I love, and I think the audience in their response love your, your prescription very well, that we need to be worker-centric, we need to be human-centric, that because this is the era that we need to refocus on what economics is about. It's about solving human problems so that our welfare increases. But all the problem that I see and all the questions that I'm seeing that everyone is asking, please keep them coming, and the panelists are looking at them. Actually, you have answered quite a lot of them in just 10 minutes, and I think that is brilliant. Let's look at what, follow up the question from what you had. The downturn is inevitable. Job will be lost in preparing for the upturn and keeping safe. How should we best do this? Optimism versus resilience, which I think we need to optimistic, like Prof. Kwai just said. New growth sector, I think Prof. Kwai said that as well. And creative destruction, that is the keyword he uses, that we need to have some, clearly in any we are into industrial revolution. Some will gain, some will lose. Unfortunately, we have to let some of them go, and to protect the worker, not the job. And quite a lot of you are looking into new growth sectors, and quite a few looking at protect the worker, not the job. Right, that is very interesting. So we like to see your response, but I really like the point of being worker-centric. I think this is an era that we need to revisit all the economic theory about how we could improve the welfare of the people of a country. Thank you, Prof. Kwa. That is stimulating. That is a very deep insight, and that is something that I think we all treasure, what you've just said. And now the next question is, if we could get back 8% growth at the risk of a third wave, should we go for it to take the risk? Should we balance, COVID? Well, just say, should we balance Jet Li and Bruce Lee? Who do you think the punch will be more painful, right? So you would think that we should go for it and take the risk, or unsure if it's worth the risk or not take the risk. I think, Prof. Kwa, your reading is, I think, very, very right. You read it very well. That is, we should not take the risk, because as each wave that come along, we're going to be a little bit more painful than the last, because we can't take so many punch from Jet Li. So thank you very much for responding to the survey. We have more coming, but let's move on, because Professor Laura Wu will have a greater insight, because she has done some very technical work to give us even more insight of the 30 people who responded. So Professor Laura Wu, please take over the stage.
Oh, thank you so much. Am I sharing my screen? Yes, okay. Thank you so much for having me for the event. My talk is Singapore's battle against COVID-19 under a global perspective. The picture on the front page signals my general position on the future course of Singapore's economy. I am cautiously optimistic. In the recent World Economic Outlook, the IMF defines the current public health and economic crisis as a crisis like no others. It predicts that the world economy will decline by 5% this year, while the advanced economy will see an 8% loss in GDP. And this is certainly a crisis like no other to Singapore as well. The last quarter just witnessed a lowest GDP growth rate in our history. The first half of 2020 had a real GDP growth rate minus 6.7%. Recently, the MTI has projected this year's real GDP to decline by 5 to 7% from last year. The Economic Society of Singapore has organized this webinar to discuss a set of tough, but I believe highly pertinent questions. Now, here are my answers after some homework. The answers are short, but apparently not simple. I think, in general, the global economic recovery depends on two things. One is how long and how severe this global pandemic will last. This is mainly in the domain of epidemiology and immunology. And the second is how well the public policies will contain the virus and revive the economy. This is mainly in the domain of public policy and economics. Of course, in the context of Singapore, one has to take into account the specific structure of Singapore economy. Under this logic, I have 4 bullet points to share. One is to take a closer look at the global and Singapore pandemic. Second is to examine how Singapore has been containing the pandemic relative to other countries. This point is mainly based on my joint research with my colleague Fen Qu and our PhD students Yuan Menying and Zhou Shihao. The third is to evaluate Singapore's economic policy. For this part, I will largely give credit to the recent reports from MTI and MAS. Finally, I will conclude Singapore's economic recovery as a K-shaped recovery. Now, due to time constraint, I will only be very brief on the third and fourth points. If any of you happen to be interested, the full version of my presentation slides will be available on the Society webpage. Okay, point number one. These two figures give us an overview on the COVID-19 situation globally and in Singapore. The left panel is the global daily infection and global daily deaths reported to WHO from early January to middle August. As we see, even in recent weeks, every day, more than 250,000 people are confirmed infected by the coronavirus, and more than 5,000 people lose their lives due to the coronavirus. This suggests the pandemic has not been under control at the global scale. The right panel is the daily infection by different groups of Singapore. As we know, so far, only 27 COVID-19 caused deaths are reported in Singapore. Therefore, mortality is not a major concern in Singapore. However, in terms of infection, more than 56,000 cases are reported, among which 95% are dormitory cases. The community and imported cases see a first peak in early April and a small second wave in early July, but is generally declining over time. So, my point number two, how Singapore has been battling against COVID-19 infection and death. To answer this question, we need first to control a set of predetermined factors that may affect how vulnerable a country is inherently to COVID-19. And second, we need to have a fair benchmark arriving from a statistic tool. This figure highlights our main finding from our regression analysis using cross-country data in the past 8 months. We plot the 3 most important risk factors in red and 4 most important protective factors in blue. The length of the bars indicates the percentage change in infections per million people due to 1 standard deviation increase in a factor. For example, all else being equal, enhancing the government effectiveness from a level of Italian, which happens to be our sample average, to the level of South Korea, which is 1 standard deviation higher than the sample average, would reduce infections by more than 70%. Think of Singapore. This is a country with world highest GDP per capita. And we are definitely the country with highest population density. Meanwhile, the income inequality is also pronounced in Singapore. All these predict high risk of infection for Singapore. However, on the other hand, we also have the world's best health infrastructure and government effectiveness. We have also learned a good lesson from the SARS outbreak, and we are blessed by a high temperature in this case. So overall, how has Singapore been doing relative to other countries? Here, we list pandemic policy efficiency ranking for 100 countries with sufficient data. if we evaluate Singapore using total number of infections, it is ranked 77th place in the world, which is even worse than UK, US, and Spain. However, if we only look at community and imported cases, Singapore is ranked world number 17. The big difference in these two numbers, once again, reveals the poor living conditions of the migrant foreign workers and highlights the serious neglect of the welfare of a large group of people. Fortunately, the case fatality rate for this group is almost zero. Therefore, Singapore's death ranking is world number 14, only next to New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, among advanced economies. So to conclude, Singapore has been doing very well in saving the lives and relatively well in containing the virus. So why this is important? This is because we find that there is a significant negative relationship between the pandemic policy efficiency and GDP loss. Here, the horizontal axis are the infection and death ranking from our empirical exercise. Pay attention. The smaller the values, the better a country has been tackling the pandemic. The vertical axis is the differences in GDP growth rate between the first half of 2020 and the first half of 2019. So the smaller the values, the less a country has lost in aggregate output. Therefore, the downward sloping curve suggests that a country that has been dealing with the pandemic better, in fact, has less GDP loss. Now, this is really the single most important message I would like to take away from my talk. We'll understand that for a given point of time and for a given fiscal budget constraint, there is a trade-off between lives and livelihoods. For example, a longer lockdown and a stricter containment policy will certainly lead to more output loss for that period. However, if we extend our horizon, not too long, just for half year, and if we compare across countries with similar economic background, we find, in fact, better pandemic control leads to less economic loss and probably quicker economic recovery. I think the fundamental mechanism lies in the power of the market itself. Households, firms, and the rest of the world do react for their best interest and under their expectation. In this case, the pandemic itself is the most important factor in their expectation. Remember, one of the keywords come up from the audience is uncertainty. So for this reason, I'm cautiously optimistic about Singapore's economy. Of course, this does not mean the government should do nothing on economic policy. And this is my point 3. As Professor Lee has already helped us go through the major budget Singapore government has been implemented in the past several months, I'm going to be very brief on this. Just to give you a very simple benchmark. So the total stimulus package up till last week accounts 20% of 2020 GDP of Singapore, while the average fiscal stimulus in advanced economy is about 9% of GDP. And according to economic survey and analysis by the MTI and MAS, the immediate effects and the short-term effects of Singapore's stimulus package are all very positive. I also have evidence from the foreign exchange markets. Of course, it will be too early to evaluate the medium and the long-term effects, although I believe these are definitely important public policy to be evaluated. Okay, my last point, how Singapore's economy is going to look like. There are both a lot of upside factors and a lot of downside factors for recovery, which I don't have the time to elaborate, but which I believe all of you have a good idea on them. So let me jump into my conclusion. I think, like most other advanced economy, Singapore's economic recovery is most likely to be K-shaped. In other words, some will get their momentum back and have a V-shaped recovery. Others will stay at the bottom for quite a while, if not persistently. This is true not only for different sectors and industries, but also true for different people in the assets market and in the labor market. So, final word, what is the policy implication? I think there are two. One is the policies should look after interest and welfare for the sector and the people in the downside part of the K-shape in order to narrow the gap between the two parts of the K. Implication number two, this is a crisis, but this could also be an opportunity to speed up a structural transformation. That is to reallocate people and capital and resources from the downside of the K to the upside of the K. You can either call it creative destruction, or you might want to call it structural transformation. Thank you. That's all I would like to speak.
Well, Professor Wu, this is really the most interesting results that I have seen. And I think the most powerful two impacts of public policy, one is evidence-based research. And you have actually produced evidence to show what the trade-off is very clear, that we need to focus a lot more on the COVID-19 management itself. I think that is a very powerful set of results backed by empirical evidence that you have. And the other thing is that I really like about this, a K-shaped recovery. And that is the kind of, again, a very powerful statement that when you see this K, is a clear reminder that, again, the economy is not only in the asset clusters, there's actually now we have a very clear distinction of the rich is getting richer, poor is getting poorer, but also that this pandemic is making the situation even worse than before. And both your conclusion and foresight is very impactful. But I think that Dana has got some more questions to ask now. As I summarize what you have just said, I think it's important to see that both Prof. Kwa and Prof. Wu has pointed to the importance of really going down to the economy structure. And you look at all the questions that are coming in, I can see that there are quite a lot of questions of how should we manage to get out from this pandemic. So I think I would allow the panel members to respond when Dr. Paul Schotti has finished. I think that's one area to look at the pandemic. How now that we know that the results are there, that we can see that this is what we need to do. So let's go deeper into the question and answer questions. The question coming from all of you is, how are we going to do that? Right? What's the trade-off that we will see? We really believe that we got to sort of go in deeper into protecting the human life and ensure that there's no infection, and to ascertain whether there will be lifetime immunity that we have. I think those are one question. The other questions that keep coming up from there is about the real estate. The cost of the economy, the real estate seem to be one of the major issue about whether real estate is making business costs a lot higher, whether we should really look at real estate as just as a place for human to stay, or more an investment asset. I think that is what I can summarize the questions that's coming from the audience. And the third question that I want the panel to think before Dr. Paul Schotti will go on to ask about is about the competitiveness. How do we reinvent ourselves? Being a small economy, we are not like China where we have 1.4 billion people, or like India, which is huge, or even Indonesia close to 280 million, or America to 300 million. How do we, increase our competitiveness while we are walking out of this country into the virtual space? Because for all the longest time, we have all these companies that's making money either because they're protected by regulation in a smaller market, and then we can see that companies have become stronger and stronger, and quite a lot of them, by coincidence, become the domestic link or government link companies, and they are fairly well sheltered, which is maybe not very true, because we have seen quite a few sectors, right? I mean, from the comments that we say they're well sheltered, not really. We have the oil sector, oil and gas sector. We're in South America. We have many other sectors that we see from ST Engineering, our airlines and so on. But it just happened that a lot of this that we were excelling are actually being hit by the COVID, because they are not the K shape where they're on top, which I really like the K, right? It's not on top of the K, but at the bottom of the K. So it just happened. They were competitive internationally, like SQ and so on, like oil and gas, but it's just that they're hit, So let's go back to the question. While the panel are thinking how to answer those questions, how do you think Singapore did in combating COVID relative to the world? We have done very well, 37, done a so-so job, done badly. I think it's also a K, right? I think on top the K, the community have done very well, but 28 is probably thinking about so-so in the sense that in the bottom of the K, we didn't do very well because of the living condition, which actually very close to what Professor Laura Wu's empirical results are saying. It's the living condition. We have two types of living conditions in Singapore. And the next question is, what shape do you think the recovery will take? Is it going to be a U shape? Is it going to be an L shape that will take a long time to come back? A W will come back, and then the next wave, the second and third wave that come, is going to be K. Those people who are in the digital world that will go up, and then I think the rest of us who are in travel industry, in beauty products, in F&B, and so on, that will do badly. Or is it going to be none of this? So we're going to give a few more seconds, but we're going to move on to Dr. Paul Schotti, which I think will give us a bit more from there. So we're going to stop this now. I think roughly we'll see that mostly are K and W. So Dr. Paul Schotti, the stage is yours.
Okay, do you have these slides up there for mine, or what's the deal? So first of all, I'll make 3 points. The first point is that I think that whether this was going to be COVID or a terrorist attack or an accidental war with Iran, the world was in very excessive leverage, and whatever would have come along in 2020, and a lot of people were looking for something to come along that was somewhat catastrophic, would have punctured this bubble of excessive debt on many levels, at the household level, at the government level, at the corporate level. That's the first point. And the second point I want to make is that, a lot of these, I teach at universities in Hong Kong, and I teach in Boston, and I teach in London. Everyone's in trouble, right? Everybody's in trouble. Everybody is being forced to reinvent themselves. And I think this is especially true at the university level. I believe the Amazon moment for universities has arrived. I think that the debt levels for the student debt are at very excessive, and so this is also problematic. So thank you. I see the slides are up. Would you mind going to the next page, please, on page 2? So what I want to talk about is, okay, what are we going to do about it? And what I would suggest that we need to do about it in Singapore, which I think Singapore is remarkable in its governance. And David and I talk all the time, and we agree on things, and we don't agree on things. I think that what we're going to be seeing going forward is we're going to see the smart countries are going to have to circle the wagons and get everyone working together. The government's going to have to work closer with the private sector. The universities are going to have to step up. Rich people are going to have to put their hands in their pockets and start funding foundations. And corporates are going to have to start bucking up and getting people into training centers. Corporates just can't stand by and be firing people left, right, and center. That's not going to work. And so that's my message. We're going to have to circle the wagons everywhere, and everyone's going to have to pitch in here, or there's going to be very serious problems. The private sector by itself is simply, it's impossible for the private sector to pick itself up right now. That's just not in the cards. And as an example, I want to go forward here that we have some major corporates stepping up in terms of incubators. So Singapore, we need to think about incubators and accelerators, right? We have the Qualcomm Accelerator, we have Originate Labs, we have Green Wings Biomedical, we have Stubbs, Alderton, and for law. We have Disney Accelerator, we have for the cloud and media and the environment. The government's going to have to start having some private conversations with some of the rich people in Singapore and some of the big companies and say, you know what, you need to step up and start retraining people because otherwise this can't work. I really believe that. It's just impossible for people to just have to go back and take a class on something. There's going to have to be a very united effort. If we can go to the next page, please. That's very kind. So on the next page, we can see just some examples of what universities are doing and what Google did. Last week, Google said, you know what, you can skip university. We are going to create a Google Career Certificate that's going to substitute for a university degree with foundational skills to help job seekers. Courses designed to be completed in 6 months. Certification for a 4-year degree. NYU Poly Power Labs, MIT Global Founders. Stanford probably has the best one. I'm going to focus on that in a minute. USC and the LA Art Center Design Accelerator. These are all systems where I think, I know that SUS does really interesting stuff. NUS is doing great stuff. I think all of that needs to be stepped up very dramatically to get a triangle between the corporate sector and the worker to help get retrained, and the government has to be a part of this. Otherwise, I just believe very strongly economies that don't do this will fall apart. Next slide, please. In the next one, I show you just focusing in on the 6 things. What if we could wave a wand and have 6 things? These are the 6 things you want to be thinking about when you're putting together programs. Industry. What do we need in Singapore? I think one of the most interesting things in Singapore that could be quite a huge benefit to Singapore is, and again, this is a kind of a controversial program because it's basically import substitution by saying, you know what, if Australia is going to ban its fruit or meat exports to the rest of the world, fine. We're going to have to create subsidy programs for protein alternatives, for protein plant vertical farming. And so I think vertical farming for protein substitutes, I think is going to be a huge business in Singapore, and Singapore should be the capital, the world's capital of the Impossible Burger. Funding, again, just talk to the large companies here and say, you know what, you're a great corporate citizen, start coughing up some money. Number 3, mentorship. Incentivize superannuation funds to get involved in private equity. I think this is really important. I know Singapore, the Temasek does this, ST Innovate does this. I think we should do more of it. Education. Customized apps are out there and are cheap. And then number 6, on the resources, give people space, legal, payroll, platforms, storage. San Francisco does this. London does this in big scale. So these are some of the examples I would use. This is what we can do while we're dealing with COVID, by the way. These are things are not These are not, exclusive to, to dealing with COVID at the same time. I do agree that COVID creates obviously very problematic dynamics. But, I got to tell you guys, I think COVID is only speeding up what was already inevitable. A lot of companies in Singapore were not competitive for many, many years. Lian Feng in Hong Kong is a great example of an old company that was great that just died. It just collapsed under its own weight because it never changed. And there are companies in Singapore like that. These were companies that were great in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, and they've been falling by the wayside for 10 years. COVID is only speeding up what was already underway in universities with some of these uncompetitive conglomerates, airlines, and so forth. Next slide, please. And the next one, you'll see that, there are initiatives all over the world that are focusing on demographic groups. There is no reason why some of these types of venture capital funds and sort of a pooled capital, whatever Singapore decides to do, young people, focusing on the young, focusing on the LGBT community, focusing on women, especially, they are especially hurt during COVID. This is really important. NGOs, there's every reason for NGOs to be vitally important here, especially in the issue of the environment. Next slide, please. On the next one, we see some cities, right? So every city's in trouble, and every city is going to be doing things to try to take business away from Singapore. And Singapore is going to have to do everything it can to try to take business away from other cities. This is how this competitive game works, whether it's Hong Kong or Dublin. There's lots of centers of excellence around the world that also have 5 million people. Barcelona, has 5 million people, right? Hong Kong has basically, a sort of a 5 million people workforce, right? Berlin is a global leader in a lot of the fintech. It's a very small population city. So Singapore needs to put itself on the map, and I think that Singapore should really be taking its best foot forward and showing the world that it has confidence, because people have great confidence in the government and its ability to be able to address issues in a way that a lot of other governments aren't doing very well right now. And the next slide, just look at a couple of of initiatives that are being done in cities like the United States. Again, cities are also small populations. Austin, Texas created a sound and entertainment and technology and music capital of the country in 15 years. Pasadena, a very small old city in California, is becoming one of the design capitals of California. Venice is now, I used to live there. It was like a crack den, crime-infested area. Now it is one of the fintech areas of California, right? And so population should not be a restriction here. Dublin, same thing. Look at what Dublin did to come back from the dead. Amazing stuff. Germany and Berlin, same thing. So I think there's a lot going on. Next slide, please, shows you the things that can be done. Prizes, prizes, prizes. $1,000 is a lot of money to somebody right now. Give prizes for problems. State a problem, and it can be the government, it can be a university, it can be a company. State a problem and give a prize. Pension contributions to private equity, equipment and space for innovators. Again, a task force czar for protein, I think, in Singapore. Lobbying groups, there needs to be more effective lobbying groups. The FinTech Association is great. Japan has the Japan Association for the New Economy. Town halls, more town halls, right? People need to hear what ideas people have on a very neighborhood level of what can be done. And then the last one is it gives you some examples of the prizes that are available. The Google Milestone Prize, got somebody to the moon, right? Cognicity.com is a great one. Loyalty 360. Again, just going to the last slide. The Ansari Prize. Get somebody to do a private sector spaceship. They won $10 million. DARPA has all kinds of programs, and they have large prizes for self-driving cars. A huge prize that was given out to create the longest living mouse, right? A NASA prize. I think prizes are vital here. $1,000 is a lot of money to somebody right now. And with that, I'll end. And the last page is my books, one of which I wrote with David. Another one just came out, The Race for 5G Supremacy, also World Scientific, published in Singapore. So that's all I got, and I'm looking forward to questions.
Thank you, Paul. This is fantastic. Every time I look at your presentation, you actually surprise me because your ideas are just keep flowing. And each time I learn a lot from you, and today is no difference. I think, well, I won't summarize what Dr. Paul Schotti have said because he has got a lot of books. I recommend you to actually get them and read them. But more importantly, I think you have a lot of questions that we don't have much time. So I will start with the first question. I have 4 questions. I will start with the first question to Dr. Schotti, is that you have actually recommended a lot of very innovative solutions, right? But a lot of people in the question that are worried about the retraining, and we have a K labor market as well. So people, Laura has talked about it, we need to take care of the bottom. Do you have very specific solution for the bottom part of it, which I think the audience are very concerned about? How do we take care of that to ensure the society is stable? Is there any
Yeah, no, it's a great problem, and of course, I think the shocker in the world is how large that the bottom of that K is in the United States, right? Where there's a tremendous problem with undereducated people who, especially now, I do a lot of work in drug and alcohol addiction treatment, as David knows, and I think drug addiction has really skyrocketed. Alcohol addiction is probably skyrocketed during COVID. I think it will lead to violence for governments to ignore and tell the bottom of the K to just pull up your pants and go back to school. I think that will lead to violence, and it's happening in America. Those people need to be taken care of. I loved what Danny said. We save the worker, not the job. And if you have an unequal society, you're going to get violence. No matter what you think, violence will come because there's nothing to lose, and they're cut out of the pie, and they're desperate. And so to say that pure market-based, competitive-based, Schumpeterian, destruction for the bottom of the K, I think is inappropriate. I think that they need welfare. They need, people are starving. There's people in the world now who can't eat, especially in America. And by the way, when governments give out money, that money just swirls around the economy. That's one of the laws of economics. Not only that, but the government gets the money back in the taxes. And so there's a lot to be said for letting money swirl around, in a Keynesian manner in order to prevent violence and destruction, because that takes 10, 20 years to come back from. When your society falls apart with violence, it'll take a long time to come back. Just look at Hong Kong, where they haven't taken care of the bottom of the K for 15 years. Singapore does a very good job at that. It probably needs to do a lot more.
Yeah, very interesting. I think what you're seeing is that most of the policy now is that the money is not going to the right people. So that's what's happening in the world now. We have to really target a segment where the money really got to go to that segment with a very high marginal propensity to consume. But we are running out of time. There's so many questions. I've actually looked through all the questions and summarized into 3. And I'm going to ask that all 3 questions from all of you to the panel so that they can respond as they go about. I'll go around to ask them to respond. The first question that is, what if we have a vaccine? That is the first question, and any panel member could actually answer that question. The second is that the high real estate prices is translated into high renter, and in terms of wages, we are less competitive. So we are in a very tight situation. How do we deal with that? Because as compared to other countries, compared to China, maybe we are 3 times more expensive. Compared to Eastern Europe, maybe we are 10 times more expensive. You know, so how do we deal with that? And the last question, which I summarized from everybody, is that it's about the competitiveness. You know, again, back to the same question I asked earlier on, that the large companies, which we have been catered to them to come to Singapore and create the jobs, they may be competitive around the world. They may be looking at our land costs, they may be looking at our wages, but more importantly, our own companies who wants to go global now into the virtual economy. Are we competitive enough? So those are the 3 questions that I summarized from the audience. Maybe I can go around now to Prof. Danny Quah, that you can pick any of the questions to answer.
I'm happy to do that. Thank you, David, for summarizing that so well. And thank you, fellow panelists, for such interesting presentations and ideas. The question that David has thrown me is, what if we find this magic bullet vaccine? Isn't it the case that all these problems go away? And I think Kin Ao and some others in the audience were asking about this. So here's my conjecture, that the problems won't go away. And there are 2 reasons I say that. First is that COVID-19 is just one member of a family of coronaviruses, and they're constantly mutating, they're constantly evolving and changing. Just as we have not gotten rid of the common flu because it constantly mutates, so too there's the possibility that this particular virus will continue to evolve, and we're like chasing a moving target. That doesn't mean we shouldn't look for a vaccine, but it just means that other considerations remain. We continue to need to be vigilant. And the challenges that COVID-19 today throws out for us is like opening a Pandora's box that tells us these are the issues that you're going to be concerned about. Issues about congestion, issues about taking care of the bottom of the income distribution, issues about how you manage mass transportation systems. All of those will remain. It cannot be business as usual, but there is a way ahead. Vaccine will help, but it will not cure everything. Back to you, David.
That's really interesting. I think a lot of people will agree with you that it's just not a vaccine problem. There are a lot more underlying problems that we need to look at. So anyone, Laura, you have any response to any of the questions?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I agree with what Professor Danny Quah said, but I'm a bit more optimistic than him. Okay. If you look at the stock market, in particular the US stock market, I checked the recent data. There is a positive correlation, about 0.6, okay, 60% positive correlation between the stock market performance and the news on progress in vaccination. Of course, one can argue the US stock market is probably overvalued at this point. And of course, investors are always optimistic. But still, I think there is an upside option for the possibility of a vaccination. And because I invest in some biomedical stocks, as far as I understand, there is progress on R&D on vaccination, and some of them are actually promising. So if this happens, of course, that will be great. Okay, although I understand there is such a possibility that the vaccination does not really come into effective and the virus keep on mutating. So that's all possible, which is really the downside risk. But let's say if the good news is we have a vaccine which is reliable, effective early next year, which will be very timely because we are concerned on the second global wave early next year. It will be winter again early next year. And remember, temperature is the most important protective factor. So if there is no vaccination by early next year, we should be concerned on the second wave. But then on the other hand, if we do have a vaccination, this should, to a large extent, reduce a lot of uncertainty. And of course, these are good news for the economic recovery. Although I totally agree with Professor Quah, a lot of structural transformation should still continue going on.
Yeah, so hopefully
let's see. I mean, one of the things we need to remember is there are 9 coronaviruses out there, and many of them have been around for 50, 60 years. How many vaccines do we have for coronaviruses, including sort of one of its cousins, HIV? Answer, 0. Viruses mutate all the time, and you only need one protein mutation in a string of 1 million. 1 out of a million can mutate, and then the the antibody no longer recognizes the antigen. And so this is the problem. Viruses are very, very clever. And so, yes, I'm optimistic. I hope we get a vaccine. I hope I'm right. But we don't have a vaccine for hepatitis, and hepatitis is a huge killer. Chlamydia, dengue fever, HIV, many others, right? Where those have been around for dozens, dozens and dozens of years, and they kill tens of millions of people. There's no vaccine. And even the flu vaccine is only effective between 10 and 45% of people, right? And so 55% of people have no effect from the flu vaccine. So look, I'm an optimistic person. David knows that, but we need to be realistic as well and get on with life and move forward and be bold and be confident and say, you know what? Singapore is moving ahead. This is what we're going to do. Here's our plan. Get off the back foot and get out of the worry corner and step forward.
So Paul, maybe I can ask this question as a follow-up, the second and third question. You live in Hong Kong for a much longer time, right? Property prices is so much higher than Singapore, and the wages are also higher than Singapore. So the second question is about wages and property prices. And also the third one is about, how competitive it is. So from your experience globally, how would you address the second and third question in terms of competitiveness?
Well, you know what, David, I think, I've just been thinking about this in the last few days. I think we're going to have to start really like blowing up, just getting TNT and blowing up all of our ideas, because we're going to have to be really rethinking what we're going to do with property. What's going to become of a commercial office space? What can we do with high-end real estate that's empty because people left? How can we adjust real estate to accommodate a lower income? There's going to have to be, we're really going to have to just blow the roof off. And even the developers, I think, are going to have to really rethink about this. China is moving ahead at flank speed in connected cities. And, I just put out some research today on China Chain and the stuff that China Chain is doing to revolutionize cities and urban planning and smart cities is truly remarkable. Singapore needs to hook up with that and get moving. Singapore is a node in China Chain, right? Singapore needs to be friends with the US, but it also needs to be friends with China, which is doing some state-of-the-art technological change in how we understand cities and neighborhoods and residential buildings and urban planning and commercial office space. So we got to get on board with China here. What's going on with China Chain, we need to pay attention to that. That's the way out.
Yeah. Those of you who are not onto Dr. Paul Schotti mailing list today, he set out on the blockchain-based service network, BSN, which is very interesting. I urge you to take a look. Professor Danny Kwai, you have anything to add?
Oh, no, I think the way he said that is really well taken. I might expand a bit on something that Paul referred to in passing, which is that there might well be huge blocks of office buildings and what is now expensive real estate that will no longer be needed because the way in which COVID-19 has made us change the way in which we work. We need to be prepared for that. There could be a coming crash in real estate prices, or put it another way, there could be a rationalization. In the long run, that might be a good thing because it would change patterns of income inequality. It would, much of the reason why the inequality is so high is because the rental on scarce assets is so pushed by demand. But once the economy rationalizes the way in which we distribute people, workers, consumption across space in a way that's more respectful of distance, then all of these prices will need to change. Inequality could well fall, but we need to be watchful for a potential crash in what might now be very overinflated real estate prices.
Right, that's a very good point that Professor Danny Kwai has raised, that we have printed really a lot of money, so much so that I think the asset market is actually to me is all-time high, that we really got to watch it very closely. Professor Wu, you have anything to add on to that?
Oh, maybe I can come back to one point about how to help the labor force during the structural transformation. Yeah, I have something to say because I work for NTU, and I can say something which is very relevant. In the past, 1 year, okay, actually that's even before the COVID-19, we have been working very hard to help the labor force adjust to the digital economy. For example, we have set up a mini master program, and we have started this lifelong learning. And we are going to make internship compulsory at NTU. So these are all the efforts, the higher education level has been help the labor force to transform. And if I can say something, okay, for the younger generation, I understand many of the audience are students. So for students, apparently we are going to do two things. One is to make the right choice for the sector or for the subjects you are learning. And the other is really to enhance the literacy. While the literacy today is different from the literacy 100 years ago. Literacy today means two things. One is financial literacy. Another is digital literacy, which I'm sure Professor David Lee, you know best. So that's what I want to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that comment about the education side, because we are all educators. You know, the Economic Society, I think it's important to identify which area we go into, which is very, very difficult. So we really need to train them on the job and all. I think Dana has some more questions that you can pose, right? Are you going to have some more questions that we will pose? Okay, no, okay. So I think we have run out of time, and I'll pass on to Danan in a couple of minutes. But I hope you all enjoyed today's discussion. There was like a no-hold discussion from COVID to our cost issue, our labor issue, our dormitories issue, and so on. But there are solutions. There's always the case that once a mindset is set to say that this is a problem, we can always solve the problem, because we are all human. If we become human-centric and focus on economic science being to improve the welfare of people, like what I think Professor Danny Kwa, Professor Laura Wu, and also Dr. Paul Schotti is talking about, we must always focus on the kind of innovation that can do good. And I personally feel that we are at the era, at least in my lifetime, for the past 60 to since Second World War, that we can do good and do well at the same time, even for entrepreneurs. I think that is the biggest positive that I see. That is very important for us economists to continue to do evidence-based research in those areas to give the right public policy prescription, and have the humility to understand that the world is so uncertain with so many different viruses that we may not have a solution. But how do we deal with them? I think if there's only one sentence that I need to summarize for today's discussion, is that we need to be human-centric. We need to go back to the basic, to care about the human race, not only about your own country, but there is a multiplier effect all around the world, you know, that we need to worry about. It is not just about your own nationality. There's mobility. There are many people in your country, many people in the region that we really need to take care. And I hope today's discussion will entice and stimulate the thinking that we can do more research in those areas. So thank you very much for listening. And once again, I would like to thank Professor Danny Kwa. I would like to thank Professor Laura Wu, and I would like to thank Dr. Paul Schotti. And with that, I thank all of you for listening in, and I pass on back to Danan.
Thank you, Prof. Lee. For the last segment of this webinar, we'll be sharing for the winners of the World Scientific ESS webinar giveaway. For the Singapore 2065 by Professor Houston Kwa, the winner is Chen Jiayi. For all the winners, we'll be emailing you for details on how to get your free book. The next winner for the Inclusive FinTech by Professor David and Linda Low, the winner is Lim Yi Teck. The next book of AI and Quantum Computing for Finance and Insurance by Paul Schotti and Professor David Lee, the winner is Jia-Yi Lim. And of course, we have The Race for 5G Supremacy by Austin Groves and Paul Schotti. The winner is Ling Yang Lun. Thank you so much for participating in our webinar. Please look forward to our website for more details and materials that we release for this seminar, such as the recording and the slides as well. For our next seminar on the 23rd of September, the title of the webinar will be, Will the US dollar continue to be the dominant reserve currency? Please continue to go to our website, and we look forward to see you in the next webinar. Thank you.